Will this win be so mighty?
We're having fun with Mark Boulter's office. Well, we'll start with the famous question. Who are you?
I'm Charles.
Yeah,
Channel 9. I'm the PR representative. Make sure this is all going to be.
You're the least PR guy. if you really got a PR job here, I know the world has completely changed.
So we're here today to talk about Cider.
Yeah.
Mark Boulter. And you haven't introduced us to your...
I don't know.
Brian, introduce yourself, mate.
I'm Brian. I'm a developer on the Cider team.
Great.
All right. We get to meet an actual real life coder.
Yeah.
The Channel Niners have been complaining, will you bring us into the dev teams? Well, here you go.
So Brian always refers to himself as just a developer. Brian's actually the architect for the designer architecture we use in Visual Studio 2005, and both Windows Forms and ASP.NET uses, and also the what is it now? WWF World Wildlife.
Windows Workflow Foundation.
That thing.
The
The cool designer we showed at the PDC for that is all built on top of the work that Brian did.
That's actually the coolest thing at the PDC that hasn't gotten a lot of notice. People really haven't.
If you looked up the PDCbloggers.net, though, there was quite a bit of talk about it.
Yeah.
That and Link. Those two got a lot of...
Link, I think, translated outside because people... a lot of developers use databases, but this workflow thing is a mind bender that you sort of have to think about the way people work together differently, and you're really trying to automate that. And it's like, wow, that's fascinating. I think that's the real thing that we announced at the PDC that really is different.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of great stuff about that.
It's not evolutionary, but it's revolutionary kind of work.
The thing that I think that's hard for WWF is... they started, well, the name, of course, they started from...
All right, who named that?
Yeah.
I want to know. Is it a wrestling?
Right there. They started from this background of transactional, distributed types of systems, and they still do that really well, right? But they also can do all these new kinds of applications. They have this very flexible model. Yeah. So they're kind of climbing out of this prior art or prior history of things being a little bit different than what they're really doing. So
very cool.
What they've got is pretty awesome, though.
Very cool. So, what is Cider?
You're not allowed to know. It's a secret.
All right. Well, that's why we're here.
So my personal triumph at the PDC was I was actually allowed to call what we're doing Cider. Instead of the proposed official name for it was the visual designer for Windows Presentation Foundation, codenamed Avalon, that will ship as part of the version of Microsoft Visual Studio, codenamed Orcas. Luckily, we're allowed to call it Cider.
See, this is why I don't. This is why I'm not yet a marketer, because I don't know how to come up with these long names.
Well, everybody makes fun of code names, and now you know there's a real reason for it.
Yeah.
In fact, I think that might be a mild exaggeration on my part. To be fair to our marketing people, what they asked me to call it, which was a little bit short than that. But so. Cider.
No, is this cider alcoholic, or is it the what we call apple juice here?
I'll let Brian explain how we came up with the name cider, because that was Brian's idea.
We've only got a little bit of time. Yeah. long story. So turns out you can burn a lot of days trying to come up with a code name for a product.
This is why we don't ship
Top
around
lines, Mark.
So Cider is a design surface for Avalon that's aimed at line of business application developers. So
so the guys who are creating the standard old gray UIs.
If it's Battleship Grey, you do it in Cider.
Okay.
So it's our goal is to be familiar to our existing customers. So if you look at the guys who are building Windows Forms or ASP.NET applications today, our goal is to have a design experience that's familiar to those developers. So it's not the other tool we're working on is Sparkle as part of the Expression Suite, and I'll demo both of them in a minute, and you'll see that one's very.
Well, we've seen a demo of Sparkle on Channel 9.
So that's obviously aimed at design.
Just out of curiosity, why make that design decision? So in other words, why not have the design surface in Visual Studio be just as powerful as the design surface in Sparkle?
Well,
that way you don't have to just generate XAML and pass a file off to somebody.
Well, it's not not about it's not about not being as powerful.
Okay.
It's about having a way of working and the set of tools that you work with that are familiar to you. So if you look at Sparkle, well, I mean, one of the reasons Sparkle isn't just a design service in Visual Studio is the Sparkle team wanted to build a product that was aimed at designers and used the kind of metaphors that designers used to in the other graphics design tools they use today.
Gotcha.
And so if you look at it, it's got like a drawing palette with all these foofy drawing tools on it and that kind of thing. So it's about presenting things to...
That'll win you a lot of love with the graphic designers.
Sorry, just to be clear, there's foofy design tools and then there's geeky developer tools. So my insults are equal on both sides. Yeah. So about now there are people who are both designers and developers throwing tomatoes at their computer screens and slamming their fists on the desk going, how dare you? So I'm an equal opportunity insulter. So I think I just got myself fired.
I don't know. Maybe a promotion. There's a promotion ahead.
So the idea is to present our customers with a tool that fits in with the way they work and is comfortable for them and presents the tools that they used to using. So Sparkle is about a professional design experience and aimed at that market segment. And Visual Studio is about developers who write code for a living and do UI work. And there'll be, in terms of capabilities, there'll be overlap between the two tools, but with different emphasis. So for example, in Sparkle, I can produce the UI and I can edit the XAML and I can do some coding behind it and I can do some debugging and those kind of things, but it's not really... Its primary purpose is not coding and debugging. You can do that, but if you're going to do a lot of that, then Visual Studio will be a better environment. And equally, in Visual Studio, you'll be able to create templates and styles and data binding and all the things that are about the reasons you wanted to use Avalon in the first place. But it's a tool that's aimed at developers, and therefore it has a toolbox and a property browser and a document outline and kind of things. The things that the developers are used to seeing, and the selection model and those kind of things are in line with that kind of development.
Since I watched the Sparkle video and I've talked to a lot of MVPs who are getting into this new world of building really beautiful apps, it seems to me that the development methodology is bifurcating. The old style development methodology was controlled by the hardcore developer, and they handed over their app to a graphic designer to pretty up at the end. Maybe add a logo, maybe add some color, maybe straighten out some of their forms and stuff like that. The new world is like the
that's what we call the lipstick on a pig approach.
Yeah, the lipstick on the pig approach. Where like if you saw the North Face demo that we showed off at PDC, that was in the new development methodology where a graphic designer really was in charge of the full development methodology, and you could see that in the Sparkle videos too, right? Sparkle, we had John Guzman, who was a developer, and we had Manuel Clement, who's a graphic designer, and you could see how they were working together was far different than most VB6 apps or VB.NET apps that I've seen developed. And I think that's why
I wouldn't put it in terms of who's in charge, because that always leads to arguments. But and we know it's neither the designers nor the developers, it's the PMs who are in charge.
No, they just take the credit. They take the credit.
I've been taking the credit from Brian's work for years and years and years.
And a good job you're doing that too.
Thank you, Brian. So it's apparently a complete inability to say anything at all. It's about allowing people to do what they're good at. So for example, I can sit down and write code and I can design business objects and those kind of things, but as I will demonstrate momentarily, my UI design skills are appallingly bad. I mean, I can take pretty much anything and make it look bad. And so, in an ideal world, in fact, the way I work here at Microsoft is I work on the overall design and I'd work on the code behind the application, and I'd let somebody like Manuel or Dan Dole, who's one of our UI interaction experts, will work on the UI and the visual behaviour of the application.
Yeah.
So, phone.
Yeah. Sorry, let me turn that down. Keep going.
And so I think that's what's fundamentally different about what we're doing with Avalon and XAML and having tool sets that are aimed at those customer segments. Is really allowing people to work on the pieces that they're good at and is their area of expertise, and produce better products as a result.
Now, one of the things that I think is kind of getting lost in this hyperbole of designer developer, making interaction easier, making your life wonderful, is that there are developers that are actually really good designers.
Yeah, Brian, for example, is. No, well, you're compared with me.
I'm better than you are.
Yeah,
but it's not really saying that.
Sorry. Yes.
So what's your thinking? So you designed the surface inside of Visual Studio. You designed the Cider.
Yeah, so
right.
Cider's designed inside of Visual Studio, and one of the things that we're looking at doing is there's a mix. There's a mix of people who have different sets of skills, and Sparkle does, like you say, represent one extreme. The Flash animator, the Photoshop person. People are used to using those very graphical tools, and we've been sort of targeting Cider as the other extreme, but there's really a lot of blending in between there. So if you think of something like PowerPoint, for example, you don't have to be a very good graphic designer to get decent-looking slides out of PowerPoint. You can take baby steps and go to the templates.
Sure.
You can take broader steps and download templates off the web. Or you can take a little bit broader steps and design your own templates. But even the design your own template model of PowerPoint falls way, way short of the kind of rich animations that you can do in Sparkle, for example.
Okay.
So we'll probably have the same kind of thing where you can either choose to take baby steps and just pretty things up a little bit, or you can go a little bit further or a little bit further. If you want to go the full professional design suite of something like Sparkle, well then Sparkle's a better tool for that than Cider will be.
Yeah. Sure.
We use the term prettying up, but is there actually a real business use? Are we studying how people are more productive with a better design form, or are you giving people tools to design better user interaction models, that kind of thing?
That's certainly one of the areas we're looking at. I mean, from a point of view of a product, we're taking baby steps as well.
Yeah.
The first step is to have a designer and tool in Visual Studio, and to get to the point where you can do the things that you can do in Windows Forms today, rather than writing XAML, because frankly, it might not be the most popular thing to say. I've seen enough XAML to last me a lifetime. I want the designer. So the first thing is to get a design surface and get it up and running, and get to the point where we have the same capabilities of Windows Forms, and then start to layer the kind of key features of Avalon on top of that. So things like templates and styles, which are fundamental to building those new kinds of user interfaces. Yeah. And we are looking at the kinds of things customers are building and places where Avalon adds value. So anywhere where you want to do some visualization of data, like I saw an example of a customer application this morning where they built something, that they got an application in Windows Forms, and this is, I can't go into specifics, but it's a classic line of business application that's about driving business processes. And there was a piece of the application where they wanted to get a better understanding of the relationships between the customer they were talking to and other customers they had, and the value of that customer to their business. And the way they were currently doing it was basically as a set of fields with information in. And it's very hard to glance at that and get an understanding of how valuable this customer is to your business. And so what they've been doing was experimenting with visualizing that by, drawing a map that showed how valuable this and so on. And they put a lot of time and effort into doing that using Windows Forms and GDO+. And you look at that and you go, well, that's just the kind of thing Avalon's designed for. Yeah. So they're the kind of places we expect to start seeing customers really leverage Avalon and kind of the full power of the platform that is WPA.
Yeah. Now, if an app starts its life, like let's say Manuel Clement designed us an app, business app, and made it look great and went through user testing to figure out if everything was laid out the proper way, could he hand you the app and could you open it up in Cider and then could you go to town on Visual Studio?
That's exactly the scenario, and we demoed this at the PDC, but that's exactly one of the scenarios that we believe is important, that I can just, I can take something from Visual Studio and just open it up in Sparkle. I can take something from Sparkle and just open it up in Visual Studio. So the designer can work on his piece, and I can work on my piece, and we can easily synchronize the two pieces together without having to, go through some Vulkan mind meld where the bitmap that he gives me, I have to spend 3 weeks mistranslating into a piece of UI that he looks at and goes, that's nothing like what I was after in my design.
Thanks to XAML, right?
Yeah.
The vector nature of...
That's exactly.
So in other words, it's going to be easier to make nicely shaped windows. Is this true?
Do you think that's true, Ryan?
I think that'll be true.
I hope so. Because I remember doing that in Windows Forms, and it was just not a good
It's not
experience.
very easy to do. The other thing that Avalon really brings to the table that we've just never had before is the notion of the really rich data templates. You can take a list. You can start with a list box that just shows text in rows by default, and customize a data template for that, and get something that you would have to spend literally multiple weeks on in Win32 to get the same kind of UI.
Outstanding.
So I think that it's not just pretty; it's also useful.
Totally. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So can we see it?
Yeah,
All
yeah,
right.
if you want.
Cool.
Do you want to do the demo or shall I do it?
Go for it.
You sure?
Yeah.
Okay.
Alright.
You can tell us exactly what's going on.
I can tell where Mark messes up.
No, you're not allowed to point that out, Brian. So what I thought I'd do is I'd just show a quick demo of one of the apps we built at the PDC.
Shut those.
And
No, it's fine.
can you see that okay?
Oh, yeah, I can see it.
Yeah. And you can see we've got a little whizzy thing over here that goes, and down here we've got kind of a little toolbar-y thing that moves up and down so I can resize my desktop. And then if I click on Manage Quotes here, I get this piece of UI up. And you can see here I've got, this is the Infragistics Data Presenter Control. So Infragistics gave us an early drop of their Data Presenter Control that they're working on. That's a data grid for Avalon. And this is very cool. I'm showing a very simple view of it, but you can do like a 3D card view and all kinds of really interesting effects with it, which is basically taking the combination of kind of Infragistics domain knowledge about building grids and then the capabilities of Avalon and putting
Very
it
cool.
together. So that's very cool. So then we can click on like David Treadwell here. So this data's a little bit out of date now, but you get the point. And then I can bring up this form, and you can see Joe and I built this together.
Yeah.
And you can see we've got the nice little highlights here. So these are actually radio buttons that have just had a new template associated with them. So rather than having to write a whole load of graphics code, just like Brian said, I can define a template which in VB6 terms is kind of like a user control that you can use as the visual for any control. So I can click on this and I've got the nice animation there. You see that? Isn't that pretty?
Wow, that is pretty.
There we go. And then the other thing is, of course, I can just resize the whole thing and that zooms in and out. And you can see
Do that again.
Yeah.
That was backing up.
Okay. You got that?
Yeah, that's really neat.
Yeah. So
You
this
get
is
that
just
all-
something
you
for
get this
free.
all for free in Avalon.
Yeah, that's right.
How long would it take to create a graphic like this in Win32?
Stack of time.
Yeah, you probably wouldn't.
Well, if you're the Halo
Designer
team.
giving you
Yeah, I mean the amount of work to take and put that's done in Direct 3D. So the amount of work it would take to put a Direct 3D surface on there and get the blending just right, so you get the transparency behind it. I just don't think you'd do it. It's not worth the time.
Yeah.
So this was I can't remember which 3D tool this was created in, but this was created in a 3D tool and then exported as XAML and just imported directly into Sparkle.
Wow. So how many hours do you think you spent on that little graphic?
Well, I didn't spend any time on the graphic. So somebody who knows how to do 3D does. But I mean, we built this form in 10 minutes in a demo in the PDC, beginning to end. So anyway, so let's just go ahead and start up Visual Studio. So So we're in Visual Studio, and we're going out of Visual Studio again. So what I thought I'd do is just build. Oh, look at that! That's beautiful. This we build this little app here, which is a lot less flashy than the app we saw, but it has some of the same things. So I can come in here and I can search for the Beatles, and it'll go off to the web and pull down information about the Beatles. And again, you can see this is a list box. This is just a list box with a data template that Brian wrote, and I've got my pictures of my albums in here, and you can see I've got the nice gradient fill and a highlight on it, and it's responsive. I can scroll through and look at new stuff, and it's populating that while I'm scrolling. So my app's staying responsive. I can go off and kick off a new search if I want to, and search for a band I really like Susie and the Banshees. I'm an old goth punk. So
The only one left.
yeah, apparently so. There were lots of us when I saw Susie and the Banshees down in Seattle. It was amazing how many of us came out of the woodwork. Anyway, so let's go ahead and build that little app. Oh, that's the wrong application. There we are. So we're in Visual Studio.
So the other one you had up there was Sparkle?
Yeah, well, and I'll show you why I've got Sparkle up there in a second.
Okay.
So I can just come in here and we're going to create a new Avalon application, and we'll just call this Media Mania. And so I'm using, what are they called? The Microsoft extensions for Visual Studio, for WPF, or
For WinFX.
for WinFX. All right, okay. So what I've installed the extensions for WinFX for into Visual Studio. So I'm running Visual Studio 2005 with those extensions, and then I've got the designer extensions installed on top of that.
Okay.
So you can see here,
Now, how much of that stuff is available today?
So the extensions, which are project templates and IntelliSense in XAML and those kind of things, they used to be codename Fidalgo, are available today. I believe you can download those from the website. Certainly, if you're an MSDN member, you can get hold of them.
Okay.
And they plug into Visual Studio 2005. The designer itself isn't available yet.
Okay.
We can talk about when it will be available after I finish doing the
Cool.
demo.
Okay.
So there's the design surface. You see, I've got the toolbox over here. I've got my designer. I've got my document outline. I've got my solution explorer. I've got my property browser there. So
It's Visual Studio.
It's Visual Studio.
Yay.
Yeah. And down here at the bottom, if you look down here at the bottom, you can see we've got the little tabs down here. So I can flip to XAML view. I can flip to source view. And then down over here, if you got that?
Down over there?
Down over there, if I now move out. If I move that in and out, you can see we've got zooming built into the design surface there.
Right.
So if I'm doing detailed work, or I've got a really large form I'm working on, I can just zoom to the appropriate level.
Yeah.
So not quite your father's design surface.
No. This
So-
isn't Alan Cooper's Visual Basic.
So you can see I can just start adding controls on them. We've added snap lines, so I've got snap lines working in here, and we've got the little indicators showing you where you are. And little indicators there showing the size of the controls. And so it works just like the current design surface. But the interesting thing is that over here you can see what we're actually doing this layout on is a grid control, which is Avalon's equivalent of a HTML table or a Windows Forms table layout panel. So, and we stole it. I have to admit, we stole this shamelessly from the Sparkle guys. Who had this really great idea, which is I can do 2D layout on the grid. I can get the form laid out the way I want it with the ease of use of just doing 2D layout, and then I can start adding rows and columns to it incrementally so the thing resizes correctly when I resize a form, or if I localize it, it automatically resizes. So I kind of get the best of both worlds there,
Cool.
which is cool. And the bit we've got working at the moment is dragging and dropping stuff on the grid.
Okay. Cool.
So then the other thing, if I come over here and let's change this button. We'll change this to button 2, and let's just put. So I put a little bit of odd formatting on there. Now, if we flip back to the design surface, you can see there's button 2. So it's just picked up my changes. If I move this control around and resize it and go back to XAML view, you can see it's completely preserved my formatting. So we've got formatting preservation there.
Wow.
Yeah, no. I haven't finished. I haven't finished. So watch carefully. Keep your eye on width on those there. You can see we can just undo these.
Whoa.
And it just puts so you can see from that we're actually doing incremental.
Wait a second. It remembered your
The
formatting changes separate of your design surface changes?
Yeah, so plus the design surface changes. So the design surface changes are incremental changes on top of the formatting changes I made. So not only have we preserved formatting, but you can see that we've only made very incremental updates to the XAML there. So
So
we
is
really
this your
have
feature?
No, that's Chuck's.
Chuck's?
Chuck Jasky. He's
Okay.
a genius when it comes to source code preservation.
Where was he when I was a front page user? back in 95, 96.
So let's
Front
just,
page, by the way, would not do this. It would,
says
every time
source
you formatted, made it look pretty, and then you went into the designer and changed something, it would rewrite all your HTML.
yeah, I think they've improved.
They have
a lot.
improved it.
Visual
It's-
Studio did that even
Yeah.
in one app.
Yeah.
So we'll go and build that little Media Mania up now, just quickly. So you can see here I've got a dock panel now, which is one of the things Avalon does is give you different types of containers for different types of layout.
Yep.
So I'm using a dock panel, so I can just.
Now, what does a dock panel do that's different than a grid?
So what a dock panel does is it allows you to basically position controls butted up against the sides of the container. Let me demo.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So what I'm going to do is you can. I thought bother. There's a no that. What happened there, Brian?
You did.
Oh, I said it's
filter.
true.
False.
I meant false. Okay, sorry about that. So you can see I'm a complete incompetent. I can't talk and do at the same time.
No.
So you can see I've got the little thing here, and you can see this control is butted up against the left-hand side, which is the default.
Yeah.
But I can pick it up and move it, and you can see we've got these little highlights up here, and these show where I can position it. So, for example, I want this at the top. So I drop it on there and it goes to the top. So docking is about positioning the control butted up to the sides of its
Now those, just
contain.
briefly, those highlights exist by default in Windows Forms for 2005, right?
No, these highlights are something.
These guys are new?
Yes, these are new.
Positioning?
There's something that our UX team came up with as part of our layout design.
Okay.
And then Brian, the actual highlight there, and the little drop indicator is something that Brian designed in Sparkle. And then we pulled it into Visual Studio.
Yeah. So the nice thing about using Avalon for the designer is all of the adornments and other glyphs that you see on there are stylable controls. So we can adjust the styles of those whenever we want. And they're also fully scalable. So like if Mark zooms in and you drag over that highlight, it doesn't get chunky. It's not a bitmap. It just stays nice and clean and animated. It looks nice.
Very cool.
Outstanding.
Okay. So while you were chatting to Brian, I just added a list box to the middle there. So now let's go and add some radio. Yeah, no, very sneaky. Add some radio buttons to the top, and you can see I can just.
I can see your UI skills aren't all that great.
Yeah, I don't know what you mean. You can see I can just lay this out like I would Windows Forms. And down here, if you remember, we need a text box, and we need a button, and we need another label. Yeah, and I've started to get this kind of how I want it laid out, which is great. So let's save that. Now let's go over to Sparkle, and we can go and find that same project. And here it is. You can see, and this is a project that we created in Visual Studio, just a straight an ordinary VB project.
Yep.
I can just open this up in Sparkle.
You can have them open in both sides.
Yeah, so now I've got it open in Sparkle and Visual Studio. Yep. So let's say I'll put my designer hat on, or do you want to put your designer hat on?
Yours is a lot more entertaining.
All right, okay. So I'll put my designer hat on, and unfortunately for everybody involved...
Here's a lipstick on the pig.
Yeah, that's right. So what I think what's going to make this really stand out is some... what did I do there, Brian?
What are you doing?
He's playing with the gradient control to make a different...
I changed it from a circle. How did I do that? So let's change this end, and we'll make this red. Oh, that looks beautiful, doesn't it? Do you think? Yeah. Okay, so that's what we'll go with. So now
I'll get a client to pay for this.
let's go to the list box, and we'll do that. Now, what I'll do is I'll pick the transform tool from here, and we'll transform that around. Oh, that just looks beautiful, incredible, doesn't it? Yeah. And then finally, we'll set the background of this thing. And I think like that. But I think this end will actually, rather than doing yellow on this end, we'll do blue. So let's save that. So that looks just absolutely fantastic. Now, of course, if we go back to Visual Studio and we say yes to all, it didn't reload it. Beautiful. What happened? I don't know. So if we just reopen that, apologies. You can see I've picked up those changes from Visual Studio. Yep. Oh, let's try it.
From Sparkle.
That's really excellent.
It would have been excellent if I hadn't fluffed it. I have to admit.
Well, I mean, basically what this means is, as a developer, you can just design the surface, and then you give it to the designer rather than the other way that people talk about it as a designer give you their pretty pictures.
Or if
now the dev says, "Here, make it pretty."
But let's be
I
honest.
like that model.
David Shadle gets first dibs. The graphic designer Manuel Clement gets first dibs.
So the nice thing is, because all this stuff round trips, you don't have to go from A to B or B to A. You can iterate back and forth until you get it just the way you want it. So,
which means the
really
team is
awesome.
much more productive because we don't need to wait 3 weeks for the graphic designers to
Right.
get finished. We can actually work together.
or much more unproductive because you spend a lot of time fiddling around with stuff. That you
No, that's only you, Brian. So if you, for example, if I just, oh, bother, what did I do? If I just pick this property here and change this to my media, for example, so I've changed that label there, save this, go back to Expression, open it up in Expression, and get a crash. Beautiful.
Yay!
Send error report.
So what should have happened is that should have reopened in Sparkle as well, and of course
This
that
is
was
why we
working
don't have it
perfectly.
yeah. Now you know why it's not available.
So
What should have
Okay.
happened is you should have been able to debug it in Visual Studio.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, we could have debugged it in Visual Studio, but that would actually make kind of a boring demo.
Yeah. Well, that was exciting. We
Okay.
got a
That's
crash.
Okay.
So I mean, how do
Fix
you,
those bugs. with
So
circles.
that just shows it's real, doesn't it? So let's
Yeah.
just add a couple of files to this. So let's. So what I'm going to do now is just I've got a web service I created earlier that I've just added to the project. So let's add the references for the web service. Come on, come on. And we need system.
So what are you doing here?
I'm
adding
sorry.
reference.
What I'm doing now is I'm going to hook it up to the web service.
Okay.
So I'm just adding the references for the web service.
Got it.
And I added the code for the web service down here.
Okay.
So there's my web service. And then actually that UI is looking horrible. So luckily for us, Brian actually created some UI earlier. So we can just come back here, go to XAML view, and flip back, and there we are. That's saved your eyes and mine a little bit, hasn't it?
Wow.
So this is
That's the same app, just different.
just
layout.
different. Yeah, it's actually just different colours. I mean, the app's basically the same. You can see I've still got my radio buttons here. So
Yeah.
so we've
Now,
just
that's another
restyled
thing
it.
that I haven't really keyed in on is that it looks like you're going to be able to share code with developers in a far different way
Yeah.
than you are today.
Yeah, I mean,
Because today with Visual Studio, the UI and the business logic is sort of wrapped
yeah,
tightly. Here, the UI and the business logic can be very, very separate. So I could do something cool and then hand it to Charles, and he could just cut and
Yes.
paste it,
Yeah.
boom, and he has a new app.
yeah.
And the resources for the UI can either be stored in the local window, like we're doing right now, or they can also be promoted to the app level or the style level at the global theme scope. So what that means is, if you're writing a large application, you can have one designer sit down and design a whole bunch of styles, plug them into the app level XAML file, and all of the forms across the entire application will pick that up.
Awesome.
So you don't have to touch everything when you want to adjust your.
Does this
UI.
also mean I can skin my apps much more easily?
Yeah.
I can have 3 different XAML files and sort of you click a button and it switches between the XAML live on
Yep.
runtime?
In fact, you can also do skinning. There's a lot of different ways to choose how templates are brought in Avalon. So you can have templates that are brought in based on data type or based on other properties that are set. So you can actually choose skinning dynamically based on anything you want on the object model.
Cool.
Which is cool. So I've just
You're gonna
flipped
see
it.
some really crazy apps.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it'll be like the web. You remember when people first started creating HTML pages, and you got all kinds of interesting design ideas.
Yeah.
And it kind of settled down, and there were some fairly characteristic ways people build certain styles of apps on the web, and good design principles get rolled into those.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you'll see with Avalon. I think initially everybody will just go wild with it. And out of that, we'll shake out some really, really great ideas for different ways to
Because
to
you
do
could make
things.
it so every time I
Yeah.
clicked on the screen, the whole color scheme could
Yeah,
change of
yeah,
my app,
absolutely.
or the shape of my app could change, couldn't
We're
it?
kind of doing some of that today, right? Like, when was the last time you saw any Avalon demo that didn't feature like rotating, spinning 3D somethings?
Yeah.
Right? Like we're playing with the platform right now, and sooner or later we'll settle down and say, well, how do we actually make it do something really useful?
So what I'm going to do now is just add some code behind this. So I go and select my search button, and then the click event. So this is just like I would in Windows Forms today. And you can see up here I've declared an instance of my web service. So I can go and select that, and I can find the item search completed event there and hook that. So one of the things we've done with the Avalon team is the event-based async work that we did in the WebB timeframe for ASP.NET and Windows Forms, we built in a way that allows Avalon to participate in that. So when I have a web service that has completed events on it that I can kick off asynchronously and handle it, it takes care of all the threading issues and that kind of thing. You can do that just as well in Avalon as you can in Windows Forms. So, and again, because there's a fairly large number of parameters to this web service, I'm going to cheat a tiny little bit. Rather than have you watch me type, what I'm going to do is go down here and just cut and paste some code in.
It's the Julia Child style of development.
Yeah. So,
look what just came out of the oven.
Yeah. Well, you really don't want. I mean, it's mostly parameters to the web service call, and you don't want to watch me do that. So here's the app up and running. So if we go and search for Bauhaus, another one of old goth punk band, you can see that there we are. There's the app up and running. And the only thing about this app that I haven't really demoed is the creation of the style for the list box here. So this is a template for the list box, and we're not quite at the point in Cider where we can edit those in Cider yet. So
okay.
So come back again later, and we'll demo how to build that piece in Cider.
Very cool. So let's talk about when are you guys going to have a CTP soon, or
let's talk about dates. And I can't give definitive dates for anything right now. There are certain dates we can talk about. So where we are now is Visual Studio 2005.
Yeah, that's coming out November 7th.
Yeah, and what I've just shown you will not be part of Visual Studio 2005.
Okay.
Mid next year, there's the release of WinFX, which includes WWF and Avalon and Indigo and all these good things. Our goal is to have a beta version of Cider available around that time frame. Now that's a goal, that's not a promise. And then at some point after WinFX ships, there'll be the next version of Visual Studio, which is Visual Studio Orcas. And the designer that we've just shown you will ship as part of Visual Studio Orcas.
Okay.
Now, in between then and now, we want to have CTPs of the designer. Yep. And we're actually in the planning process.
CTPs are...
Sorry, Customer Technology Preview.
Yeah.
So it's like a pre-beta beta.
Yeah.
And so it's basically a way of us getting bits in people's hands at the earliest possible opportunity. So we're figuring out at the moment when we can have our first CTP. As soon as we've got something we think is going to be useful and people are going to find more useful than they find frustrating, we'll ship a CTP. I don't know exactly. It's not going to be next week, but we're certainly not going to wait until the first beta to ship a CTP. Our goal is to get something in people's hands as soon as possible. Once we have an official timeline for a CTP, I'll let you know, and you can put it up on Channel 9.
Great. Anything else we need to know at this point about
I
Cider?
I think so. I've remembered
Windows Presentation Foundation. I gotta get that word Avalon out of my head.
Well, I don't know. I still use Avalon.
Yeah.
I think pretty much everybody does.
It's so much easier to say than Windows or WPF.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although I was thinking about it, and I always found WFC pretty easy to say, and it's just another three-letter acronym. I think we'll get used to it over time. So.
Well, I have some
you got
geeky questions. How did you implement it? So was it? So now you had. So it's Avalon. It's an Avalon construct. How challenging was it to implement inside of Visual Studio?
Well,
as it exists in 2005?
the real challenging thing was learning Avalon, because I have a long-standing background in Win32, and it's not that Avalon is harder than Win32. It's just different. So it took me quite a few, probably 3 or 4 weeks to get enough under my belt of Avalon to actually figure out what it is that we're actually going to do. Huh. And then some of the other things that we looked at was we got a lot of mileage out of the Windows Forms Designer. We designed that so that third-party component vendors could plug in their own design time, and that way you could have these controls that had very, very rich behavior in the designer. And that was actually really, really successful, but it was actually a double-edged sword. It was more successful than we thought it would be, and because of that, we didn't really have the documentation that we needed, the samples we needed, the things in place to make component vendors super successful using it. And a lot of them were very successful, but it was not without pain. There's a lot of pain involved. So what we started looking at with Cider was, well, how can we make this a little bit easier? We know it's going to be popular. So we think that we're working ahead of time to make sure that we get the documentation in place and things laid out very clearly as to what you can do and what you can't do. The other thing that we're looking at is the Windows Forms Designer was very extensible, but as a part of that it also was fairly complicated to understand how it worked. And Cider has the same level of extensibility and therefore in a lot of cases the same complexity. But what we've figured out how to do is we've built this complexity in layers so that if you just want to sort of contribute to an existing feature, all you have to do is set a few properties, and it's very easy to do. If you want to do something more complex, like provide your own feature from scratch, well then you start to get into a slightly more complex world. But the nice thing about it is if you're just contributing to existing features like smart tags or the verbs or adding adorners and things like that to your controls so you can drag them around in a different way, that's actually very easy now.
Cool. Fantastic.
Cool.
And we got that working.
Will you show it?
Sure.
So go on, you show.
Yeah, so this is another control that we showed in some of the breakout sessions at the PDC, and what this is it's a user control. It's just a very simple slider or color picker control that has a series of sliders on it. And what we wanted to do was show a progression of how you might add some richer design time functionality to this. So, for example, when I click on this control, I can set the various values here for where are they at?
If you flip it to
category.
And then look up the color.
There we go. So I can set the various values here. I've also got a nice little drop down where I can choose colors, and they will be reflected in the control. And that's a great example of sort of extending the property window to work well with this custom control. But we wanted to be able to go a lot further in Cider. And so what we've done is we've added the ability to do custom adornments and custom things right here on the design surface. So you see when I hover over these individual sliders, I get a little pop-up that shows what the current value is of the different color bars. And then also I've made these things active so that I can drag them around and I can just change values here.
And this is in design time, right?
This is in design time. So by doing this, it's a lot more interactive than having to go back and forth all the time between the property browser and kind of wearing out your mouse. And while this is actually possible to do in Windows Forms Widby today with some of the new features we've added, but it's a significant amount of work, and we're trying to make that very, very easy in Cider, so it's not quite as hard.
And the cool thing is the little adorner there. Again, it's just it's a style for the adorner control, and so that's something that Brian designed in Sparkle, pulled into Visual Studio, built as part of the app, and so you can. That adorner shape isn't fixed. It can be, as wild as your imagination. Basically.
Yeah, it's an interesting way of thinking. If I were to do this in the Win32 way, I'd have to draw my own paint logic, and I'd have to figure out where the numbers should go. When I moved the slider around, I'd have to make sure to sort of invalidate the area where the numbers were and redraw it, remember where the data was underneath there. With this, what I actually have is a style that consists of a vector graphic that's the triangle and a line. And I put a label next to it, and I've data bound the label to the value of the slider, and the whole thing is just that.
And the fact that you're actually running this, right? So if you pull that.